taking a look at an AR-15 and an AK-47. What we're going to do in this video is attempt to scratch the surface of the reasons for the debate between the M16 and the AK-47, or in this case the AR-15 and the AK-47. You know, it's something that everybody who's been around firearms is aware of, and just about as many people have an opinion on it. So I'm going to give my 2 cents. If it's something that you're not interested in, obviously don't watch the video. If you are interested and you've got some worthwhile feedback, definitely interested in that. If you've just got some constructive criticism, that's great. But I anticipate we're going to get lots of retorts to this, but hopefully it'll be a stimulus for some decent debate on the subject. So I'm going to dig right in. I'm not going to try to make this a how-to video for either the AR or the AK, but I'm going to address some of the things that I've seen over the years that people talk about as far as differences and why one is better than the other. I guess first off, they're both semi-automatic rifles. They're both have a long and effective history of use, and I'm not going to try to get into all the fine details about the inner workings. For the most part, in general, this one has, for most people's opinion, a more robust operating system. In other words, as that bullet goes down the barrel, right about here, some of the gas comes up and blows a piston back, and that piston unit comes back and cycles the action. The difference is on an AR-15 is that bullet goes forward, somewhere around here, the gas leaches up, the gas is directed back through a tube, and then the gas blows back the bolt, which travels through into the tube here, into the receiver extension, and that operates the rifle. Most people would agree that this operating system has lasted longer and has been stronger, proven over time. That's debatable, but I think again most people are going to fall down towards the AK being a more reliable platform. That being said, there's nothing to stop an AR-15 from being a very reliable platform. It just takes a little bit more effort than it does with the AK-47. That's been beaten to death before, so I'm not going to go too far into that. I'm going to take a look really quick at the sight radius, and I think at least on these two versions, and I'll take a moment to mention that there's quite a few variances in both the AK-47 and the AR-15, and just like anything out there, if you say a pocket radio, there's such a spectrum between a dollar store cheap pocket radio and a very expensive elaborate pocket radio. It's the same thing with firearms, and it's the same thing with both of these platforms. Some guns are bad, some guns are good, some guns are less quality, some guns are higher quality, and I just had to pick two to put in this video as examples, and that's going to be this Stag Arms with Bushmaster upper, I think, and thin barrel and carbine length, which just, in the AR world that describes this gun. In the AK world, this is a wire folder and typical AK length. So on a carbine length AR and a typical AK, you're dealing with just about the same sight picture. Of course, somebody could move their rear sight. You can have a longer version of the AR. You could have the rifle length or the mid length, which would give you a larger sight radius. But with the AK, you're kind of fixed with this for your rear. Some people do put rails and things back here, but for the most part, you're stuck with this as your rear sight, and your front sight is almost always right here. So a little more hardwired to the AK, but like I say, even when it's not hardwired on the AR, a lot of times guys end up with just about the same sight radius. As far as barrel length, that's a little less side by side. So right around here is where the AR starts, right around here is where the AK starts, and these are both 16-inch legal barrels, so they're just about both 16 inches, give or take, a little play on the end there. So the barrel and the sight radius is about the same. The bullets are different. The 7.62 and the 223 are different bullets, and well, I suppose I have them within arm's reach, but I'm going to keep them away from the table just because I'm going to be opening them up and stuff. But I'm sure most people that are familiar with this or that are interested at all know that the bullets aren't the same. This is a 30 caliber bullet. This is a smaller 22 caliber bullet, and they travel differently, but they're starting from a similar place. They're both starting from a 16-inch barrel in this case, and they're both starting with that similar sight radius. Notice one difference though: once you put these guns up to your shoulder, the sights on the AK are forward of where they are on the AR. And I don't know if that's advantage or disadvantage. It just depends on how you like to shoot. We're going to take a look next at the stocks, and for me, the stock is one big difference between the two that makes the AK a very popular one for me. And what I'm doing here is folding this wire folding stock, which in an AK, its entire operating system is in this section, and on an AR, the operating system is about the same size, but it's back here. And the big difference there is that requires that this receiver extension exist. And on the AK, you can have a solid stock, you can have a wire stock, you can have a solid folding stock. Because the operating system doesn't go past this point, the options are endless for you. On the AR, your options are not endless. And even if I were to bring something out like this AR pistol, because of the way it's designed, its operating system needs to move back here, so it still has this receiver extension, it still has this thing back here. Whereas on an AK pistol, no operating system back here, you don't need a stock. Okay, so then that being said, this isn't the most comfortable stock in the world. One of the things people love to jump on when I show them my rifle is, though, the stock must not be comfortable. Well, you don't shoot the AK exactly the same as you shoot the AR. Obviously, the AR has its sight back here. Most people in the US tend to put their cheek on a stock and expect their sight to be right there in front of them. On an AK, since your sight is up forward, similar to a red dot or an EOTech or something like that, since your sight is so far forward, you don't really necessarily have to have that cheek weld. And of course, not having a consistent cheek weld can affect accuracy, but we're talking about weapons, firearms that were designed to be, battle weapons. They weren't designed to be long distance sniper rifles or anything. So, like I say, the stock isn't comfortable, but when you get over to the AR, it's a plus and a minus there. Having the necessary receiver extension also provides a great place to mount a stock, and there's so many different stock options out there. I think we even have a video out there about the different stock options. There's definitely a bunch of them, but what they all have in common is they're all very comfortable, especially when you compare them to an AK. Even the most comfortable AK stock usually isn't going to be as comfortable as an AR stock. There is something to be said for having a consistent, strong shoulder weld and a cheek weld, and the AK doesn't always provide that. Another difference between the two is the length here. I'm going to set this one to a medium distance because this is a collapsible AR stock that can travel to any of these positions. I'm just going to travel into the middle and lock it there just for comparison, because what I wanted to compare was the shape of the grip going into the stock. It's very similar, but it isn't the same. And the big difference there is, well, I guess it's not real hard to, or not real easy to see visually, but there is quite a big difference. This is very squared off and boxy, and it's just not as comfortable as an AR, which again will lead to improved accuracy because consistency equals accuracy. Triggers, definitely a more substantial trigger in an AR. As an AK, it's a little clunkier as far as its trigger goes. It's usually fairly cheap parts. Good news is that here in America, for various laws including 922R, we need to have US parts, and since the trigger is 3 US parts when you replace the trigger group, most of us are running these Tapco triggers or some other brand, which are actually very good triggers. So we kind of have an upgrade compared to some of the cheaper stuff that existed on some of the older AKs. Or at least on some versions of the AK. The next thing I'm going to talk about, kind of coming forward, we've talked about the sights, we've talked about the stock, we briefly touched on the pistol grips. Next will be the magazines, and that's a big issue. While they're similar, we have two 30 round magazines. Each of them hold 30 rounds of ammunition. They're approximately the same size. The AR, being a smaller bullet, being a smaller cartridge, allows the magazine to be a little smaller, and because of the shape of the cartridge, it allows it to be a little straighter than the AK, which has a more curved magazine. But from all practical purposes, they're a very similar size magazine. They actually fit in a lot of the same pouches. But the big difference between them is the AR15 or the M16 has a magazine well. In fact, they all do. It's part of the design. I haven't seen one without one. The well allows the magazine to be guided right into place, and then it locks into place firmly with just a push. Most guys will push-pull. You can drop it by pushing that button. Very easy user interface. On the AK is an opposite example of that. Most people find this as one of the big faults on an AK. It has to be rocked into place, and I've done this, I don't know, a zillion times, so I'm tooting my own horn. I'm a little better at this than a lot of people, only because I've done it so many times. But a lot of people have trouble with the concept that there's this lug and a bar here, and they have to meet, engage, and then be rocked so that this lug engages with the latch back here. It's very solid when it's working. It offers something that might be a little showy or a little flashy. Okay, so locks into place. What that offers for some people is the ability to knock that mag out and replace it quickly. However, that's not a necessity. You don't have to know that trick on an AR. You just have to put the magazine in firmly, give it a little tug to make sure it's in, and you're ready to go. With this AK, again, you have to grab it, use your thumb, remove it, bring the next one into play, lock it into place, and then do your business. So with the AK, again, I'm going to definitely mark that as a disadvantage, that it requires a little bit more dexterity for its magazine changes. That being said, that's a big issue on the US made ones. This is a decent one, and part of the things that make a good AK receiver, the part of the gun here that accepts the magazine, is its ability to accept a magazine easily. Some of them just don't do that. I'm going to pull one out here that's a different brand, and it happens to be also easy to insert, but sometimes this hole isn't cut out well and the magazine just won't insert well. That's really not an issue. I've never heard of that really being an issue with the AR-15 at all, or with the M16 platforms, because they all make their magazine well to the same spec, which is the outside of that magazine, plus whatever the play happens to be. So it's really just not an issue. Every once in a while you'll buy a cheap, or some guy comes up with a better mousetrap and builds a new magazine that doesn't work as well, but very rarely do you find a magazine that doesn't insert and work. Back to the differences on the AK and the AR. The operating systems, as I mentioned, work differently. They're also controlled differently, and it has to do, I think, with the philosophy of the army versus the soldier versus the weapons design for the countries that they come from. Here in America, we believe in supporting our troops and having supply equipment available, where the commies didn't really either care so much about that, or they wanted it to work even with the lack of support. And what I mean by support is oil and lube and spare parts and things like that. The AK really doesn't lend itself to being repaired too much, where on the AR, with very simple tools, you can really replace just about every single part on the rifle to keep a damaged rifle in the fight. With an AK, their philosophy was to just build more rifles. If this one went down, there was a crate of rifles behind you, just grab another one. That being said, they don't break very often either. They're very well made, like a piece of farm machinery, where I consider the AK more of a sewing machine, and I just mean that it's got smaller, more refined parts, where this has larger, more crude parts. I don't mean to say that anything about the sewing part of it. So getting back to the operating system on the AK, it's very simple. Again, this is the safety and the fire, and on a real one, On a full auto one, right in here, about here would be full auto, and then that would be semi. But basically the same lever that's your dust cover is also your selector. It's also your safety. Very efficient, very simple, very, it's going towards that simplicity of the machine and the simplicity of the building of the machine. Where on the AR, there's a little bit more going on. It's not up to me to decide what's better or worse. I'm just going to describe some of the differences. On the AR, first we're going to make sure that it's empty. On the AR, you've got, well, I'll just start with that again. You've got a charging handle up here, which is one part, and you can see this one's well lubricated because that's an important part to keep lubricated. You've got a dust cover, which is its own separate entity. You've got a magazine release over here on this side that we touched on a bit. Over here, though, you've got a bolt release and a bolt hold open, which you just don't have on an AK. They didn't care about holding their bolts open, and they just never incorporated a switch for that or a part for that. Their selector and their safety is the same switch, and it's over here for a right-handed shooter, right where your thumb would be. So fire, and if this was a full auto, I would push it further, 180, and now it would be on full auto. Or if it was a burst, it would flip to burst. Basically, you can keep a shooting grip on the rifle and make your selector. With the AK, again, for normal or typical right-handed shooters, you have to remove your firing grip, make your adjustment to whatever you want it to do, and then get back to your firing grip. You can do it from here, but for the most part, it's not as simple as it is on the AR. When it comes to malfunctions and repairing or clearing malfunctions in the fight, they work differently. Again, thinking of this as a right-handed shooter, if I had a round not go off, if I had something happen, some sort of malfunction where I needed to charge the rifle, I have to reach up. Typically, you're trained, if you're being efficient, to reach up under or in front of with your offhand, potentially from the top like this, or if you needed to, you could hold it with your support hand and go up and operate it with your right hand. It's just not as efficient. With the AR, however, when you've got that malfunction, you need to reach up with this hand, because it's very difficult to do it with this hand. I mean, it's possible, but it's less, it takes some dexterity to do it with your right hand. So you're going to need to come up with this hand and hold the bolt back. Now you have a type 3 malfunction, you need to, which is a round in the chamber and another round coming up into it. The only way to really fix that is to pull the mag, pull the bolt back, and lock it. Well, you see the situation. I'm in a fight and something's happening. That's the worst case scenario on an AR. What do you do? Now, Magpul has come out with their BAD device just recently. Another company, Phase 5 or somebody, came out with their basically an extension of this switch to come over here so that you can keep your fighting grip on the rifle, but that's definitely a flaw in my opinion. Not a strategic flaw, or not a horrible flaw, but it's something to keep in mind. Nothing's perfect. Again, they weren't too worried about that, I guess, when they built it. As far as safeties, this is definitely a right-handed rifle. This one is also a right-handed rifle, but from left-handed shooters or from shooting it left-handed, it's really not too bad to bring your non-shooting hand back here and do your different manipulations of the AK. So for left-handers, except for the part where the gases come back at you a little bit, it's not too bad. It does eject sort of forward, so a left-handed shooter doesn't really have too much trouble from it. With a left-handed shooter on an AR, you do get some gases, you do get some brass once in a while. There is a brass deflector intentionally because that was an issue. Now let's get into the front hand guards. Not a lot to say on them, but it is a big subject. They're both very modular, they're both very optional at this point. In other words, there's lots of options for both of them. A couple of years ago, the AR definitely had it all over the AK, but manufacturers here in the US and around have made great strides in the different railed forends and stuff. So whatever your fancy is as far as pistol grips and lights and lasers and all that stuff that you put on the front of these things, there's definitely lots of options for the AK. There's always been lots of options for the AR. Definitely a truly modular platform in that respect. It's hard to beat an AK or an AR. But let's talk about optics, and that's definitely one where the AK is going to lose lose the race a little bit. The optics rails on an AR are basically endless. For the most part, you can go with this option, the option of a flat upper receiver with a rail on it already. I'm sure everyone's seen the forends, the railed forends, so you can have just unlimited really options up there for optics, multiple optics. Just you can go nuts with different options for the AR. As far as the AK though, this one is built here in America, and it doesn't have the optics rail, but there is a Soviet optics rail that will accept an optic, and those optics are, number one, pretty heavy because you're dealing with another piece of metal, and it's always usually fairly substantial thick metal, so you're putting some weight in your gun, and then it always lifts it up so you can see your iron sights. At least a lot of them lift it up so you can see your iron sights, which is great, but it brings it up pretty high, so kind of clunky. But one of the better options, because it's connected straight to the receiver, even though it's not ideal coming up and over, it's usually one of the strongest options. Another option would be to replace this. A couple of companies now, LaRue makes a really neat little peep sight for back here, where you basically just replace this blade with their part. Another option I've seen is replace this blade with a long sort of thing they stole from the Polish that comes back and locks in back here somewhere, and again that creates a sturdy foundation, an anchor point for these optics further back, where most of people in the US are used to looking at our optics a lot closer to our eye than with the AKs. Finally, you can get some handguard options. Not my favorites for a lot of reasons. The handguards aren't designed to be a stable platform on the rifle. They're in fact designed to be sort of loose so that dirt and garbage falls through them. So putting them up here is not ideal. The better rails are going to incorporate a lower and an upper, and they're going to lock together so that this system creates a stronger platform. But again, the disadvantage is it's way up here. Even on an AR, you very rarely see the optics that far forward. And last option, the worst option in my opinion, is these receiver covers that come off and you buy a new one with a rail on it. I'll admit that I do own one. I bought one when I first got my first AK. You don't know when you don't know. And problem again is that it's definitely never been designed as a sturdy part of the rifle. In fact, you can shoot AKs without this receiver cover. It's literally there to cover dust from getting in the receiver. It has no structural use at all, and it's not necessary for the function of the gun. So having this sight on this is, well, just not worth the $25 they usually cost to buy those. They look good, but that's about it. That'll bring me to my next point. I guess I could briefly talk about the barrels, though, since we're kind of going in a route around the gun. Front sights, I like them both, honestly. I'm a big fan of the A-frame, or the regular front sights. It gives you something that, last resort, if you need to, it's another weapon. It's a way to do something out there and not next to you. But again, lots of options. People that run optics will shave these down or not even install them. They'll do all kinds of things. Up front on the muzzle nuts, or excuse me, on the muzzle devices, the ARs, pretty much like everything, endless options, just incredible amount of options out there. This one happens to be set up with typical A2, and I believe it's set up so you can put a halo suppressor on it, which would just sort of cup over it and screw on. You can get them for like the Surefire cans that are just a quick connect. So there's lots of options for suppressors and for other like blank firing devices that just clamp on. So the muzzle devices provide their job, which is to divert the muzzle blast to either reduce recoil or reduce noise, or at least re-divert the noise so it goes in front of you and you don't get deaf every time you shoot. But more importantly, they can do other things, like I say, run blank devices or suppressors or whatever. On an AK, it's more crude, just like everything else on the AK. It's always loose, and my theory is that way the barrel can get hot and this won't bind or interfere. But who knows why it's always loose, but they're almost always loose. They're not designed for mounting things on them. On an AK, you would just remove this and screw on whatever it is you might want to screw on. So the AK is basically designed to have that threaded barrel, where the AR has a threaded barrel, but it's really not. The concept wasn't to be removing things all the time. It was a threaded barrel to put on your device, but your device was basically meant to stay in place. But the big difference between the two is the AK, at least most AKs you buy, are going to come with their own cleaning rod right underneath, running parallel with the barrel. And what that means is you have a full cleaning rod all the time with your rifle. And, you know, laugh at it or whatever if you're not familiar with ever getting a Type 3 malfunction, which means, again, that the cartridge is jammed into here. But the first time that happens to you with an AR and you don't have a rod, good luck finding a 22 caliber rod out on a battlefield. With an AK, again, make as much fun of them as you want, but I can remove that shell. That and my handy AK tool, I smack on that, and that cartridge is coming out. Not necessary every day, but again, when you actually have that time when you need to replace that or remove that malfunction, that can really save the day. Doesn't add hardly any weight to the gun. Bayonet wise, I'm a big fan of bayonets, and the AKs are definitely my favorites there. I'm going to take this cool Bulgarian bayonet and put it on my kind of hybrid Romanian German. Clicks right on, it's super strong, the bayonets are awesome. They cut both up and down. They're wire cutters, they're insulated wire cutters, so you can cut electric barbed wire if you need to. By itself, it's just a wicked fighting knife. Obviously I could go on and on. I'm a big fan of the AK bayonets. Now ARs do have bayonets, but most carbines you find can't accept them. This one has a bayonet lug, but if I had an AR bayonet somewhere, I know I have one somewhere, but if you were to put one on there, well, I'll use this Chinese rip-off one. If I were to put one on here, you see what happens? It would lock in back here, but it would be all floppy on the barrel, because that's the last thing people think about these days about ARs. Everybody hates bayonets when they have ARs usually. So that muzzle brake is just in the wrong place. I believe on a 14.5-inch barrel with the carbine length handguards and the gas block back here, then it would work. But most people go with carbine and 16 or carbine and 14 with a 2-inch thing. Maybe that would work. But anyway, you get very few options with an AR anymore where a bayonet's going to work. And most people could care less. I happen to think it's a valuable addition or accessory to a rifle. But again, if you're going to be carrying around a rifle with a really thin barrel that's just screwed on, maybe the last thing you want to do is be using it as a spear. When you have a rifle with a fairly substantial barrel for a 30 caliber round that's bolted in with 6 rivets into a block of steel, which is also riveted and connected to the rest of the frame of the rifle, and you've got something that can handle the abuse of a bayonet thrust, then you know, maybe you'd think a little bit differently about it. See, I like them so much I kicked the camera away. Wow, we're at 28 minutes, so I guess this is probably boring enough. There's other things that are different, there's other things that are similar. This definitely isn't going to be the last AK versus AR video that we do, but it was my first attempt at it. Hopefully it starts some controversy. Well, I shouldn't say that. Hopefully it starts some positive comments that get us talking, which is always fun. Always good to be talking about the differences and the similarities, in my opinion, because that makes us all more aware of our platforms and it makes us more aware of the two. What I will say in closing is that I believe that everyone should learn how to run both of these rifles. If you take all the AR-15s on the planet, you add them with all the FALs, all the other black rifles out there that have been common over the years, you multiply that by 4, and you might be talking about the same number of AKs that are already out there. So I don't care how much you hate an AK47, it's really silly to not know how to run it. It's like saying you don't like stick shift, and in an emergency, it's that person that knows how to drive stick shift that's not walking. So I encourage everyone to, if they're definitely an AR guy, I encourage you to at least shoot an AK once in a while, learn how to use it. You learn how to clear the malfunctions. If you're an AK guy, we're lucky because we're used to dealing with the stick shift. Go learn how to run an AK, or excuse me, an AR. It's fairly easy compared to the AK, but it's different. So you do want to learn how to shoot it and how to run it and how to clear its malfunctions. So if you ever have to pick one up in a time of need, you have the ability to do so. So again, hopefully the comments won't be crazy. Let's talk about some positive stuff. There's no reason to hate either one of these. Here in the U.S. at least, we can go buy either one or both, and I encourage anybody who's willing or interested to go do so. The more collectors we got out there, the more shooters we got out there, the better it is for everybody. So again, our first, hopefully in a series of videos about the AK versus AK, AR-15.